The United Cajun Navy submitted a 41-page plan. 41 pages. A detailed, comprehensive proposal submitted to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos by UCN Incident Commander Josh Gill in the days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. The organization was prepared to deploy K-9 teams and drone units. They had partner organizations in the Arizona border region ready to join. They offered to operate entirely under the sheriff's command. No independent authority, no handling of evidence, reporting everything directly to the sheriff's department. They wanted to be a force multiplier. Extra eyes, ears, hands, and feet. Nanos said no, not to this specific proposal, not to this specific team, to everything. According to United Cajun Navy Vice President Brian Trasher, there was a blanket declaration from the sheriff's office not to accept any outside help. Not just the Cajun Navy, any outside help. Trasher told News Nation's Katie Pavlich tonight on June 29th. For some reason, they just decided they were not going to take the outside help. For some reason. This is Forensic Disconnect, day 149. And today, we are going to hold that blanket refusal against everything else we know about how this investigation has been managed, because the United Cajun Navy is not the first organization whose help was refused. And the pattern that emerges when you line up every refusal is the accountability story of this entire case. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Day 149. Subscribe. Let's start with who the United Cajun Navy is. Because the specific dismissal that Nanos' blanket refusal represents cannot be understood without understanding the organization it rejected. The United Cajun Navy was founded after Hurricane Katrina and became nationally prominent during Hurricane Harvey in 2017, when it mobilized thousands of civilian volunteers to conduct water rescues in Houston. It has since responded to dozens of major disasters, floods, hurricanes, missing persons searches across the country. Its Tier 1 volunteers are current or former law enforcement officers, military veterans, and experienced search and rescue personnel. It is not a collection of amateur enthusiasts. It is a professional volunteer organization with a documented track record of recovering missing persons. Trasher said directly, "Everybody that we had lined up has experience doing this and has been successful in the past helping us recover missing persons. We have a pretty good track record, we believe, for being a civilian nonprofit organization." The 41-page plan they submitted proposed deploying K-9 teams, not the kind of cadaver dogs deployed by county animal control, but trained search and rescue dogs operated by experienced handlers. Drone teams, surveillance drones with the specific capabilities to cover large geographic areas systematically, the kind of coverage that turns a search of the Sonoran Desert from a logistically impossible undertaking into a systematic, documentable operation, and partner organizations in the Arizona border region, already willing to come, already ready to deploy, already positioned, in early February when this was submitted, to begin searching the specific geographic corridor that the second ransom note subsequently confirmed is where Nancy is buried. She is buried in nature now. The note said it. The United Cajun Navy was ready to search the border region, the K-9 teams, the drones, the 41-page plan, early February. When they were, as Trasher said, closer to the abduction date, which would have been a lot more beneficial. Nanos said no. Now let's hold this against the specific pattern of refusals that the investigation has accumulated over 149 days. Because the Cajun Navy is not an isolated incident. It is the most recent entry in a documented pattern. The FBI was kept out for 4 days. FBI Director Kash Patel told News Nation in the early weeks of the investigation that the agency showed up immediately and offered assistance but was not initially able to help. Not allowed in. For 4 days. While the crime scene was being processed, or not processed, by the Pima County Sheriff's Department alone. Patel doubled down on this claim in June. He said, "We showed up immediately and offered our assistance, not let in for 4 days. And that was their choice." He added that the FBI offered to analyze the DNA found at the scene. Nanos chose to use a private laboratory instead. The FBI's DNA laboratory at Quantico is among the most advanced forensic facilities in the world. The FBI offered it. Nanos chose a private laboratory instead. The FBI kept out for 4 days. The FBI's DNA lab not used despite the offer. The United Cajun Navy 41-page plan, blanket refusal. Every major resource that offered to help in the early critical days of this investigation was turned away by a blanket declaration from the sheriff's office. That pattern has a name. In incident command management, the specific operational framework that governs how large-scale emergencies and searches are managed, the deliberate refusal of offered resources is called resource management failure, and it has consequences. In search and rescue operations, time matters more than almost any other variable. The probability of finding a missing person alive decreases with each passing day. The probability of recovering usable evidence decreases as weather, foot traffic, and environmental factors work on the scene. The specific window in which K-9 scent tracking is effective narrows rapidly. Scent disperses, rain falls, conditions change. The 41-page plan that Trasher submitted would have been, in his words, a lot more beneficial early on when we were closer to the abduction date. Nanos chose not to let it in. Now let's look at what Nanos has said about outside help, because his reasoning, what he has offered publicly to explain the blanket refusal, is itself something worth examining carefully. Nanos has said consistently that the investigation requires laboratory analysis that takes time, that the forensic processes cannot be rushed, that the investigation is doing exactly what it needs to do. These are the explanations for why no arrest has been made yet. The slow pace of DNA deconvolution, of blockchain analysis, of genealogy. But those explanations do not address the rejection of physical search resources. The Cajun Navy was not offering to speed up the DNA. They were offering to search the desert. The specific physical terrain, the Sonoran Desert, the border region, the landscape that the second ransom note subsequently confirmed is where Nancy is buried, was offered comprehensive, organized, resource-rich search coverage in the first days after the abduction, and it was refused. Nanos has now reiterated his position on outside assistance in response to the Cajun Navy story. Men's Journal reported that he addressed outside search efforts in a new statement. His position has not changed. The blanket refusal stands. But the second ransom note says she is buried in nature now. The Cajun Navy was offering K-9 teams and drones to search the border region. They submitted this offer in the days after the abduction, when the trail was freshest. For some reason, they just decided they were not going to take the outside help. That reason has not been publicly explained. Now let's combine this with the FBI dimension. Because the specific timeline of FBI involvement, offered immediately, not allowed in for 4 days, and the specific DNA decision, offered the FBI lab, chose a private laboratory, are the two documented instances of federal resource rejection that preceded the Cajun Navy rejection. Together they describe a pattern. John Ramsey said it to this family 6 weeks into the investigation. Don't assume the police know what they're doing. Scrutinize what they're doing. Ask questions. The United Cajun Navy asked to help. They got a blanket refusal. The FBI offered its DNA laboratory. Nanos chose private labs. The FBI offered to help from day one. Not allowed in for 4 days. 3 offers of significant resources from credentialed organizations. 3 refusals or delays. In a case where the victim is an 84-year-old woman who, according to the second ransom note, perished shortly after she was taken and is now buried in nature. The nature that the Cajun Navy was prepared to search, with K-9 teams, in early February, before the trail went cold. The specific accountability question is not whether Nanos made these decisions in good faith. He may have. The blanket refusal of outside help may have been a principled, carefully considered decision about maintaining investigative control and protecting the crime scene from contamination. These are legitimate investigative concerns. The accountability question is whether those concerns, legitimate as they may be in the abstract, outweighed the specific benefit of additional resources in the specific circumstances of this case. Whether the blanket refusal of K-9 teams, drones, and a 41-page search plan delayed the recovery of Nancy's remains in a way that could have been avoided. Trasher said, I think early on when we were closer to the abduction date, it would have been a lot more beneficial. He added that now he believes the search would likely be focused on recovering remains if Guthrie is no longer alive. Remains. Not a living person. Remains. The window during which the search might have found Nancy alive, if that window ever existed, has almost certainly closed. The second ransom note said she perished shortly after she was taken. That window may have closed on the night of February 1st. But the window during which fresh scent tracks, undisturbed terrain, and the specific physical evidence of a recent burial might have been detectable is a window that February resources could have searched. The Cajun Navy was ready. Nanos said no. Now let's talk about the specific significance of the FBI dimension in this same context. Because CNN's John Miller, the most reliable public voice on this case from inside federal law enforcement, confirmed earlier this week that the FBI is taking the TMZ letter seriously. That there are certain things the FBI doesn't want TMZ to share publicly about the new communication. Nanos called the new letter another fake ransom note on the same day CNN confirmed the FBI is treating it as potentially sensitive. Two official voices, the sheriff and the FBI, saying different things about the same development. This is not the first time this has happened. Nanos called the investigation slow and procedural, doing exactly what it needs to do. The FBI director said they were kept out for 4 days. Nanos said they used the right labs. The FBI director said they offered their lab and it was declined. Nanos dismissed the TMZ letter. The FBI told TMZ there are things they don't want public. The specific pattern of Nanos's public assessments diverging from what the FBI is saying and doing is not a new observation. It has been the specific tension at the center of this investigation since the first weeks. The accountability story of this case runs through that gap, between what the sheriff's office says about how the investigation is being managed and what the federal investigators' behavior suggests about how they see the state of the case. The United Cajun Navy's 41-page plan is the newest data point in that accountability story. Not the biggest, but the most specific, because it is documented. 41 pages, submitted in the days after the abduction. K-9 teams, drones, partner organizations in the border region, blanket refusal. Day 149. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 149 days. She is buried in nature somewhere in the desert. A volunteer organization with trained dogs and drones offered to search that desert in February. The sheriff said no. 5 months later, the desert has not been systematically searched. The Cajun Navy is still ready to deploy, and the answer, wherever it is in the Sonoran Desert, wherever the second ransom note's buried in nature actually is still out there. Let me go deeper into what the specific capabilities of the United Cajun Navy would have meant for this search. Because Trasher's description of what they were prepared to deploy, K-9 teams and drones, understates the specific operational significance of those capabilities in the context of this specific case. The Cajun Navy's K-9 teams are not general-purpose search dogs. They are scent-trained search and rescue animals operated by experienced handlers who have conducted searches in exactly this kind of terrain: open desert, border region, large undeveloped areas. The specific technique of scent trailing, in which a dog is given a personal item belonging to the missing person and trained to follow that specific individual's scent trail, is most effective in the days immediately following a disappearance. Scent molecules dissipate over time, break down in heat, are displaced by wind and rain. The Sonoran Desert in February, before the summer heat sets in, before the monsoon season changes the terrain, is the specific environmental condition in which scent trailing is most viable. The Cajun Navy submitted their offer in the days after Nancy was reported missing. That is the specific window, hours to days after a disappearance, during which scent trailing can follow a trail from the last known location through the actual path the perpetrator took. From Nancy's front door, through the desert, to wherever she is buried in nature now. With a personal item, a pillowcase, a piece of clothing, something that carries Nancy's specific scent, a trained dog can follow a trail that is days old. That trail would have been freshest in the first week. The Cajun Navy was ready in the first week. Nanos said no. The drone capability compounds this. Modern search drones equipped with thermal imaging, FLIR technology similar to what Brian Hooker had on the Soulmate, can detect temperature differentials in the ground that indicate recent soil disturbance. A grave dug in the desert is a specific thermal signature. The disturbed soil has different thermal properties from the surrounding undisturbed ground. Drone-mounted thermal imaging can detect these signatures from the air, systematically covering vast areas that ground teams would take weeks to cover on foot. In February, a recent burial would have been warm relative to the surrounding desert floor, not just from the disturbed soil but from the specific biological processes associated with decomposition. A thermal drone survey of the border corridor in the days following the abduction might have detected exactly the kind of ground disturbance that a recent burial produces. That survey was not conducted, not by the Cajun Navy, which offered and was refused, not by any other organized effort in the first weeks. The anonymous tip to Buscando Corazones Nogales, which directed searchers to the Mariposa region months later, was pointing to a location that thermal drones might have identified in February. The specific grave that appeared in that region, the one that was not there in a prior search and was there in June, may have been fresh enough in February to be detectable by exactly the technology the Cajun Navy was offering to deploy. That is the specific cost of the blanket refusal, not a hypothetical. A concrete operational capability that was available, offered, and declined at the time when its effectiveness was greatest, in the area that subsequent evidence has pointed toward. Now let me also address the specific significance of Trasher's comment that the group remains willing to assist if requested. Because the door is not closed, the Cajun Navy's offer has not been permanently withdrawn. They submitted a plan, they were refused, they went back to what they were doing, but they are still there, still willing, still resourced. Nanos could call them today, 5 months in, with the second ransom note saying buried in nature, with the Mexico tip pointing to the border region, with the search for remains rather than a living person. The Cajun Navy's specific capabilities for finding buried remains in desert terrain are still relevant, still available. The scent trailing capability is reduced by 5 months of environmental degradation, but it is not zero. Trained cadaver dogs can detect the specific biochemical signature of buried human remains for years. The decomposition process produces gases that rise through the soil and that trained dogs can detect long after fresh scent trails have dissipated. The specific capability has shifted from trail following to grave location, but it remains viable. The drone thermal imaging is still fully viable. Ground disturbance from a grave months old is still detectable by thermal imaging if the burial depth and soil composition create the specific thermal signature that the technology detects. February graves in the Sonoran Desert. In the specific soil composition and environmental conditions of the border region may still be thermally detectable in June. They are still willing. The offer stands. And the blanket refusal, as Trasher described it, was a blanket declaration not to accept any outside help. Blanket. Any. Not this specific organization. Not at this specific time. Not for these specific reasons. Any outside help. A policy decision rather than a case-specific operational judgment. That policy, 5 months in, with Nancy buried in nature somewhere in the desert, deserves to be revisited, publicly, by the people responsible for the investigation, in response to the specific question that the Cajun Navy's public disclosure has raised. Now let's also connect this to the Board of Supervisors dimension, because the Pima County Board of Supervisors, which has the oversight authority over the Sheriff's Department and which faced the first of 2 recall deadlines in July, is the specific political accountability mechanism that exists for exactly this kind of resource management question. The board heard public comment about the investigation earlier this year. The first recall deadline passed without action. The second recall deadline is approaching. The specific question of whether the blanket refusal of outside help, the Cajun Navy, the FBI's DNA lab, the FBI's access in the first 4 days, represents a failure of resource management that the board should address is now a public question, raised not by critics and commentators, but by a credentialed volunteer organization that submitted a 41-page plan and was told no. The Cajun Navy is not a fringe organization making implausible claims. It is a credentialed search and rescue group that has successfully recovered missing persons in comparable situations. Its offer was specific, detailed, structured to operate under the sheriff's authority, and declined without a specific public explanation. The accountability story of this investigation runs through that gap, between what was offered and what was refused, between what could have been searched and what was not, between the blanket declaration not to accept outside help and the second ransom note that says she is buried in nature now. Day 149. The Cajun Navy's offer stands. Nanos has not reversed the blanket refusal. The desert has not been systematically searched. And somewhere in that desert, in the nature that the second ransom note describes, in the region that the Mexico tip pointed toward, in the specific terrain that K-9 teams and thermal drones could still systematically cover, Nancy Guthrie is waiting to be found. Now let's address Nanos' specific stated reason for refusing the Cajun Navy. Because he has offered a justification, and that justification deserves to be examined against the specific facts of the investigation. Nanos cited concerns about contaminating a live criminal investigation as the reason for not signing off on the Cajun Navy's plan. Criminal defense attorney and legal analyst Azari, who has been one of the most specific public voices holding Nanos accountable, responded to this rationale directly and without softening it. She said, "Well, sir, you've already contaminated the crime scene. What are you talking about?" That specific response, right, from a criminal defense attorney with over 2 decades of experience, not a commentator, not a critic without professional grounding, is the legal assessment of someone who has seen how crime scene contamination affects prosecutions. And her point is specific. The crime scene at Nancy's home was reported left open and unprotected in the early days. No security tape or perimeter. 2 reporters allegedly gained access to the crime scene area. Access that in any properly managed crime scene investigation would be impossible because the perimeter would preclude it. Pima County deputies reportedly overlooked a roof-mounted camera during their initial inspection. The scene has been described as grossly contaminated, not by critics with an agenda, by people with direct observation of how it was managed in the first days. The specific irony of Nanos refusing the Cajun Navy on contamination grounds is that the contamination concern arrives after the contamination had already occurred. The integrity of the physical scene at Nancy's home, the specific crime scene where the evidence was reportedly compromised in the first days. And then, when an organized volunteer group with controlled procedures offered to help search the broader geographic area, they were refused on the grounds of contamination. The president of the Pima County Deputies Association said it directly. More bodies are always better than one. Now let's go to Jennifer Coffindaffer's specific call. Because the former FBI agent who has been one of the most credentialed public voices on this case, the agent who spent 28 years inside the Bureau, who expressed disgust that the enhanced images haven't been released, who developed the scriptural analysis theory, published a 10-step plan on X on June 20th, and the Cajun Navy was explicitly in it. She wrote, "For heaven's sake, allow the Cajun Navy, Equ Search, Madres Buscadoras, and any other private search groups to look in that desert. Sheriff Nanos, have a deputy lead the oversight. For heaven's sake." That is the specific register of a 28-year FBI veteran who has been watching a case management decision that she considers indefensible. Not a suggestion. An appeal to basic common sense. Allow the people who want to help look in the desert. Put a deputy in oversight. Let them search. EquiSearch is another organization Coffindaffer named, a Texas-based volunteer search and rescue organization that specializes in using horses, ATVs, and ground teams to search large geographic areas. Like the Cajun Navy, EquiSearch has been requesting permission to help. Like the Cajun Navy, they have been declined. 2 credentialed volunteer search organizations, a 28-year FBI veteran calling for them to be allowed in. A blanket declaration from the sheriff's office saying no to any outside help. Now let's also go to what Brian Trasher wrote in the Washington Examiner. Because he did not just appear on News Nation. He wrote a public op-ed, published in a national outlet, addressed directly to Nanos. He wrote about Donna Bell, a quadriplegic woman left behind as water rose around her Houston home during Hurricane Harvey, rescued by Cajun Navy volunteers who organized, communicated, and went where they were needed. He wrote, "That same spirit exists today." And then he addressed Savannah directly. He said the Cajun Navy heard her daughter on the Today Show. The plea that Savannah delivered on June 23rd, We are in agony. Somebody knows something. We are begging for your help. Reached Trasher. And his response was to write a public op-ed asking Nanos to reconsider. We respectfully ask Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Department to reconsider our request. Allow us to search. That request is still outstanding. Nanos has reiterated his position on outside assistance. The blanket refusal has not been lifted. The Cajun Navy's op-ed asked for consideration. They got a reiteration. Now, let's also bring in the broader accountability landscape, because the Cajun Navy revelation arrives in the context of a specific public accountability reckoning that has been building around Nanos since February. The crime scene was reportedly contaminated in the first days. The FBI was kept out for 4 days. The FBI's DNA lab was declined in favor of a private laboratory. The county assessor was scolded for helping the FBI. The Board of Supervisors decided not to act on the accountability hearing. The first recall deadline passed. A $1.3 million lawsuit was filed against Nanos. People have been signing petitions to remove him. And Kash Patel, the FBI director, doubled down on his criticism in June, saying the FBI offered assistance and was turned away. That is the accountability landscape. And the United Cajun Navy's disclosure today is the newest entry in it. Not the most dramatic, but one of the most concrete, because it is a documented offer, a 41-page plan, specific resources, qualified personnel, a blanket refusal, and a public appeal to reconsider that has not been answered. Coffindaffer said, "For heaven's sake." Trasher said, "We respectfully ask." Azari said, "You've already contaminated the scene." The Pima County Deputies Association president said, "More bodies are always better than one," and Nanos reiterated his position. Day 149. 5 months since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The Cajun Navy is still ready, the offer still stands, the blanket refusal still stands, and Nancy Guthrie is buried in nature somewhere in the desert that the Cajun Navy was offering to search. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1.2 million. Completely anonymous. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. Do you think Nanos should accept the Cajun Navy's help now? And do you think their search could still produce results? We read every single comment. Day 149, 41 pages, K-9 teams, drones, the desert, February, blanket refusal. We will be back tomorrow.